Good morning. It is Saturday, the 31st of August, 2024. This is episode 11 of the Wi-Fi Chats, which hopefully you will recall means the Wise-Mind Fireside Chats. It's just abbreviated and made into a little bit of a hybrid. Today, we have decided to have a conversation about common sense. What is it? Can you teach it? And all that kind of jazz. So I'm going to throw it open, but I'm going to ask Gabby to start us off because her motto is teaching uncommon sense. So go ahead, Gabby, give us the lowdown.
Yeah, it's not so much as teaching, but yeah, you're right. My tagline is actually embracing uncommon sense, because quite honestly, what even is common sense? And often common sense for me are just social norms, which might not be too helpful and might lead us down a wrong garden path. So that's why I think embracing uncommon sense is actually something which can help us in our lives because it keeps us on our feet, it keeps us thinking. And the first question really is rightly, what do we even understand under common sense before we can embrace uncommon sense, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. And, I was always brought up with this belief that intellectually intelligent people don't have the common sense to save their own lives. And there is still, I think, an element of truth in that. You can be an intellectual behemoth, but come to tying your own shoelaces and not getting hit crossing the road. And sometimes you need somebody to hold your hand. So I guess for me, intellect, intelligence, and common sense are not necessarily sides of the same coins,
Yeah, I used to work in a publishing place. We published physics journals. Physics. Okay, so that's pretty high level thinking for people, editors of a physics journal. They're talking all things physics. Fantastic. But you couldn't walk down the hallway and have like a normal commonsensical conversation with them unless you're talking about, splitting atoms or whatever it is that they do in the physics world. There was no common anything about any kind of conversation with them. But common sense to me is it's just reasonable like behavior. I don't know, making good decisions based on what's before you. I don't know. It's interesting concept though, because like anything else, what seems common sense to me might not seem common sense to you. So who am I to say what's common sense, right? Like I don't feel like there could be one flat definition of I'll point that out. Oh, that's common sense, because we look at it through different eyes, and it might not. It's also depending on a person's frame of reference. I think like what they're exposed to, what is common. I don't know. It seems obvious to me when somebody's not displaying common sense. It's like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's back down to, are we perceiving common sense as those things we as societies agreed on?
Right.
Or is it something deeper where you say, okay, this is a I had a good example the other day. Somebody said there was something found in the river here, and somebody said it came from this town, and we all looked and said, but the town is downstream, it can't flow upstream. Right? So for us, that was like, that's not common sense because we all know the rivers flow this way, right? So is common sense strictly things we have evidence for in nature, or which we know this is the way it works, or is it more social norms we just accepted as societies? And what's common sense for us in Europe might not be common sense in a country in Asia.
Exactly. Like frame of reference and what individual people perceive to be right or wrong, true or false, right? Like what's true for you might not be true for me, but like an example of common sense, don't walk into traffic. Like that's common sense. Like people don't normally naturally as a whole, we're not walking into traffic. So if you see somebody walking into traffic, first you're thinking, what is wrong with that person? Not so much that they're lacking common sense, but more that they're like having an episode of some type, that they're walking into traffic. But that's common sense, right? Like I think we can all agree that that's a true statement, right? But bigger and larger, it's specific to individuals, I think, what they're perceiving to be true or false for themselves.
You raise an interesting point, which is, and we sort of touched on it already, there's intellect and intelligence, there's problem solving and understanding, and then there's basic avoidance of risk. So yes, it would seem like common sense not to walk into traffic, not to go into the raging river to rescue the dog or whatever. We always know that the dog always survives. It's nearly always the rescuer that drowns. So there's levels and levels. So something like Gabby's example about water flowing downstream, that seems like something that globally would be acceptable. If you put that, if you constructed that sentence and that explanation in any language, in any country in the world, they would probably all laugh as we did. So there's a kind of common intellect and understanding, and then there's a kind of cultural / norm thing, which I think you're correct. Certain things that are standard here in the West might not seem like common sense if you're in a different country. I heard a bizarre example the other day, which fits into your not going into traffic, which was about stopping at red traffic lights. Now, if you said to most people, what do you do at a red traffic light? You would say stop, but not if you happen to be in South Africa, and specifically certain cities in South Africa. Stopping at a red traffic light would really be an example of having no common sense, because you'd get carjacked. And it's that common that even the police say, what on earth did you stop at the red traffic light for? No wonder you got robbed or had your car stolen. So is it as common as we would perhaps, because our question is, can we teach it? What is it? Where does it come from? We can't even agree in this room at the moment.
So back to the, go ahead, Gab.
Just one quick example, Erika. I was in Vietnam, and the common sense there is actually to walk into the traffic because they don't stop. So what you do as a pedestrian, you just start walking at a nice pace over the road. You don't step back, you don't look around, you don't go backwards. You just walk steady paced straight over the road, and the cars go around you.
Are you saying silent prayers while you're doing that? Slow, steady walk across the road?
As a European, yeah. But it works.
So the teaching part, right? So the walking into traffic thing. So I'm still trying to like grasp a general like explanation of what common sense is if I was to explain it to somebody, right? So I feel it's perception, it's based on what people believe to be true or false, according to them. It could be a common knowledge, but the walking into traffic thing, teaching it, you have to teach that to your kids. Kids don't know better, right? Like young kids, they will just walk off into traffic without realizing they shouldn't be doing that. So to me, there is a part of actually teaching what makes sense up here to not do to young children, so that they grow up knowing I'm not supposed to. Probably better for me to not walk into traffic. So because I was taught that, and then they grow up with it. So I feel like it's judgment. It's judgment that's built along a period of life experience also. Like you're not born with common sense. It has to come somewhere. Someone has to teach you that, I think. Right? Otherwise kids will run out into traffic with no sense of their surroundings or anything like that. So I feel like there is a piece of being taught and life experience. The older you are and the more experience in life, the more common sense you get built into yourself.
Yeah. That brings me back to the idea what you just said. So how often have we accepted common sense as sense where it makes no sense in our lives and actually hinder us or hold us back? And that's why I feel embracing uncommon sense makes often sense. That was a sentence and a half, but you know where I'm getting at. I mean, if in Vietnam at the time I would have used only my common sense from Europe, I would have never crossed the road. I would be still standing there. That's just a really, really simple example, but putting that into a deeper meaning, how often would we stand on the side of the road, not going forward in our lives, because we're just holding on to what we perceive that's the way we need to do it, because that's the way it's done.
Totally. Like it makes common sense to not quit a job that's paying your bills. So I should just stay at my job, right? Because it's paying my bills. So to go with uncommon sense, people would be like, that makes no sense that you would leave your job, right? Well, yeah. So let's go the uncommon sense way. And it makes perfect sense to me that I have to leave my job, whoever, in order to, experience something else. My bigger question is, if it's so common, how come any of us can point out clearly when people are not practicing common sense more often than not? It's really not so common.
Right.
To this whole common sense thing, and I think everybody has a different level of common sense, and it could be how they're brought up, and obviously, like what Erika was saying, what they've been introduced to, right? So if you kind of spend a lot of time with your parents and grandparents, and they're getting more diverse, and then they start branching out from there, and their friends, families, and just learning and spending time. Common sense is not so common now. I don't know what happened at one point, but I don't know. I was going to say, Gabby, when you were saying sitting on the side of the road, we should probably ask Julian, because he's already sitting on the side of the road, and see what his view is from the side of the road there,
Well, that's sure. It makes sense for me right now because that's exactly where I am. Exceptionally. But yeah, that make me thinking about many people are focusing on being consistent and coherent, and that's misleading them. And I think like that's where the mistake it is, because like it's sometimes more relevant to be congruent instead of or the other one. Sorry, the word is missing. I don't know if you see what I mean, like the difference between like being congruent and coherent. I think that when we focus too much on being coherent, sometimes we miss the point, because, oh, but I said that like 2 weeks ago to this person, so I have to stay in this line. But sometimes we evolve, we gain perspective. So we'd rather like go like in a congruent way instead of the coherent way. That's where I think like people are losing common sense sometimes.
I'm even wondering if it's you, Gabby, you've spoken in the past about this belief through the ages that the younger generation are leading us astray. And I wonder if some of this is a similar thing, you know, as we mature. I mean, you just spoke a great piece of wisdom about great analogy of staying at the side of the road, not crossing into the traffic, not experiencing what potentially is out there. I mean, that's just flat out wise. But are we at risk of writing off younger generations as having no common sense in the same way that we write them off as being slackers? What's that quote about the young people being in the taverns and not listening to their elders that came from was it a pyramid or something?
Yeah, it's an Egyptian inscription in a grave in Egypt.
So maybe we are all on a path of becoming wiser, learning more, and we don't recognize. I mean, I'm looking back almost pink with embarrassment. I mean, I can think of some really dumb things that I did not even that long ago that now I think you didn't have the common sense you were born with. Which is that's a very English phrase. You haven't got the common sense you were born with, normally accompanied by a flick round the ear. But Erika's already identified that there's some things that we have to be nurtured into. Is there a sense that maybe we, as an older generation, aren't nurturing young people into the common sense that they, in air quotes, should have been born with?
I'm not sure that we're actually born with it, first of all, right? Like we're born with a I don't know what we're born with when it comes to this common sense topic, but as far as kids go, I really feel like they have the common sense that they need to survive the life that they're living through, right? And it might be different than the common sense we needed to survive when we were growing up. Like the world is different. If I had to throw myself fully into the way that my son has to live, like electronically and engage with his life that way, I might fail on some levels because I don't have the common sense to do certain things. Right? This is an interesting conversation that I would love to have with him and be like, what do you at your age group and peers consider to be common sense? And it could be a whole different set of things that aren't even crossing my mind about what looks like common sense to an almost 21-year-old, and I'm not, to an almost 53-year-old, right? My levels of common sense are different. That's an interesting conversation because neither one is wrong. It's just, it helps us to survive the lives that we are living.
You have a really good point, because if you think back, if we would time travel to 1850, common sense would have been that humans can't fly. Until some young enthusiastic people stepped out and said, well, embrace uncommon sense and I challenge you, and build the first airplane, right? Now it's common sense that we can fly around the globe and visit each other.
Which in years to come...
Oh, common knowledge. So yeah, common knowledge comes in there. What's common knowledge, common sense? There's a little
different
distinction.
I feel they're a little different. Like back in the 1800s, common sense, and if I was better with my history, I'd be able to make a better point here, but it's something to do with, refrigeration or something. It's common sense to not eat X, Y, or Z because you're going to die of the plague. I'm sure I have all my history lines, mixed up, so don't come at me. I'm sure my history is not on point, but you understand what I'm saying. In the 1800s, it's common sense to not eat, whatever, if you don't want to get the plague. That's a difference, but that's what I mean. So kids that are 21 now have common sense that you don't do X, Y, Z on social media, which is why when a 53-year-old does it, you get, oh my God, that's so cringy. Why did you do that? You don't do that, right? Like, that's the difference.
It's strange that you use that as an example, and whether or not you're recognizing the difference between plague symptoms is irrelevant. But at a certain point in time, we didn't have the knowledge that disease was caused by bacteria or viruses. So even that example that you're using is something that has become part of collective knowledge. I mean, if you went back sufficiently far in time, we could all potentially be idiot savants. And the reason I say idiots is because we wouldn't have the practical skills potentially that you might have needed in the Middle Ages to light a fire, for instance. So we would be lacking in common sense. We would not be able to acquire the most basic of needs, such as warmth and shelter. But then we could potentially create Archimedes' screw and show them how to lift water out of a river. So there would be the kind of genius savant part. So I think there's something in here about knowledge building on knowledge, about group knowledge, collective wisdom, influencing what younger generations understand. And you raised a very interesting point that often the older generation, there's a point in your life where you're teaching young people, whether it's your children, students at school, your peers, and then there's another point where you become the doddery old person who gets patronized and sat in the corner, and yeah, you just do your crossword, love, bring you a cup of tea, and you start to regress.
I think common sense is a mixture of knowledge, right? I feel it's got to be there. Like you cannot develop common sense unless you learn what works and what doesn't, first of all, right? And then common sense is maybe the act of actually using judgment against what you already know and making a wise choice, a good choice with against that knowledge, with that knowledge. But again, it's individual, and it, you could be in the same room with somebody and looking at the same something and have two different approaches to it, and each of them saying it's common sense to do it this way. Like, what's wrong with you that you're going about it that way? There could be a whole miscommunication going on because we're operating from two different places of common sense. What's common to you might not be common to me. Right? Like this, Brett and I can have examples of this probably every single day in our everyday life, in mechanics of even anything, like attempting to do work around the house. I might go at it a totally different way because this is from my frame of reference. This is the best way I know how to do it. And from his experience frame of reference, it's not. You just do it this way. And for him, it's common sense. For me, it's like, I don't know any better. That's not common sense to me.
So is common sense like the little tricks that you pick up that when you have it becomes the common sense, like you know, and throughout life? I'm curious, like, so that's common sense is not common because
Well,
it's different no matter where you go. Each environment, each generation, you know.
I mean, I'm not an electrician by any stretch. I mean, changing a bulb, wiring a plug, this is my limit. But, I've seen plenty of YouTube videos or even been in foreign countries where I look at something and go, oh my Lord, what are you doing in terms of just the safety of the way that something's been done? So even the way you're taught as a professional, Brett, for those that don't know, is a master electrician. So he would probably find my inability to do more than wire a plug as a lack in common sense. I'm not saying you're judging me, Brett. I'm using this as an example. Although you may well be judging me, and that's fine too. But it's maybe what we're really coming to here is the presupposition that we are all doing the best we can with the knowledge and resources that we have at our disposal at the time. And perhaps that is the definition of what common sense is.
I see. Now, I don't think you not knowing how to do like advanced level, whatever you are saying, Brett might look at you, because again, it's experience, right? None of us here know how to do what Brett knows how to do electrically, right? So we'd all be lacking in common sense if it was up to a master electrician to judge us on our our abilities to be electricians. So I don't think that that's a lack of common sense. It's just a lack of experience in electricity. What's the lacking of common sense is you sticking a fork into an outlet. Then I'd say that guy has no common sense, because we all know you should never stick a fork into an electrical outlet. So that would be a clear, he's got no common sense, as compared to he just isn't an electrician and doesn't have electrical skill. That's, to me, the basic difference between common sense and just not having experience. We all know not to stick a fork in a plug, right? Like that's general knowledge. We all know to not do that.
I can see that you're anxious, that you judged it all.
Now I'm worried that you're all going to go off.
I'm going to turn my
Test it
camera at
out.
any moment, and there's going to be a fork in a socket powering my MacBook.
But we can agree, right? That that's common sense. But again, a kid, a little toddler hasn't built that knowledge up yet. So we have to teach them that, or we can let them learn from experience. I would prefer to teach them not to put a fork in an outlet than let them learn in their own that they shouldn't do that. But again, you have to teach that to them.
Yeah.
The more I hear you talking about common sense, the more I wonder if there is a link between having common sense and being normal. It's like what's normal to be, like it's normal to, I don't know, like from when you're 15 years old, it's normal like to know that it's common sense to don't put the fork, like it's kind of being normal. So that's right. Yeah, I wonder if there is like something linked kind of with common sense and being normal. It's like there's a range of, we all are somewhere in that range, and nobody is perfectly right in the middle, being normal or having like 100% of common sense.
Right. So if you see somebody sticking a fork into an outlet, the first thing is, geez, that person has no common sense, right? That's the immediate for me. And then it's, well, wait, if he's continuing to do it, maybe there's something not working. They're pulling out of the parameter of being normal in my mind. And it's like, they're actively doing this for a reason. Something's not right. It's more than just lacking common sense, right? Not normal thinking.
I believe it's from New Zealand. It's an animation. It's got a catchy little tune. It's called "Dumb Ways to Die," and it's. Have you seen it? Yeah. Now, I thought that was just like a cool little game, and I was like quite happily trying to hook my pieces of toast out of the toaster with the fork, or see if I could get across the train tracks before the train came and splattered me. It was actually my son who pointed out that this was supposed to be an educational program so that people realized that these truly were dumb ways to die. And I think, from my perspective, I knew they were dumb ways to die. You don't play chicken with the train. You don't, at least if you are going to use a fork, you turn your toaster off at the outlet before you hook your toast out with your fork. And it took his younger mind to point out the fact that some people might not have realized that these were dumb ways to die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was common sense to you, though. It's common sense to you to not play chicken with a train.
Yes.
How'd you learn that?
Well, trade secret here in the UK, when the train crossing things come down, it takes 11 seconds between those lights starting and the gates coming down. And when I used to do sneaky stuff with covert surveillance, if you needed to make ground, you knew how long you had to go up the wrong side of the road, cut across and get through that gate before it came down. So I was actually taught how to play chicken with trains, but it was a calculated risk. You know, it wasn't something that you just did for fun. There was a purpose to it. Now, prior to that, I used to sit in my mum's shop looking across at one of the busiest train crossings in our country and being horrified at the number of times that drivers would find themselves stuck between those gates and people running and trying to lift the gates up and get their cars off the crossing and stuff, because they just didn't. So in answer to the question, I suppose on the one hand, I learned not to do it by witnessing the terror that people had when they had done this stupid thing. And then I suppose, you know, a lot of sports are risky, but you learn to do them and the risks become ameliorated and it's just something enjoyable. So one is looking back from a place of knowledge and experience, and one is being completely unaware of the risk. So I don't know if that answers anything like a question, but it's having to recognize the risk before you understand that there is a way of altering the risk into a conscious decision.
Down to experience, isn't it? Because that's experience what you had, seeing the commotion and everything. So yeah, if you never seen it, how do you know?
Exactly. There's a level of calculating a risk before you do something that is mixed into common sense. Like if I don't want to get electrocuted, I shouldn't stick this fork in there. So maybe I'm not going to do that.
Let's have a run around the room and see what we've come to in terms of understanding of common sense. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Common sense to me, well, I'm still not sure 100%, but I think that it is individual based on perception and experience and gained knowledge, and requires a level of calculating a risk against a behavior or an action I'm going to take. But I won't know that without having lived experience.
Gabby?
Yeah, I think common sense for me is learning to experience what works and what doesn't work, and some risks we just accept as a given. But for me, still, common sense often is just habits people get into, accepting the status quo without questioning it, and it can hold us back. And Erika had a beautiful example with food. If you look at diets, a lot of southern countries have a ban on pork, even in their religion. And it makes completely sense, before fridges, because pork goes off really, really quickly. If you kill a pig, the meat goes off very quickly in the heat. So not to get food poisoning, it made sense not to eat pork. And it has found its way even into some rules, right, around the world, certain religions, not to eat pork. Made complete sense back in the day before fridges, right? But is it still, you know, I know I don't want to question, but that's where those things come from. We build common sense up because of experience, and sometimes they just get so ingrained in our societies that we don't even question them anymore. And then with certain things, maybe not really wise. So for me, it's still experience, learning, knowledge, passing it on, and then sometimes they become status quo in our lives where it makes no sense.
Brett, any thoughts?
think I like what Erika said. So common sense, I think, is all relative to who we are and our experiences and our environments that we're in and experience and all that good stuff. But I don't know. Common sense is just who you are and your experiences. I don't have much on common sense because if I had Jared or somebody else that's really young, I would probably not have the common sense to be doing certain things. So it's all relative to who you are and the environment that you're in. So, meh.
Thanks, Julian.
Yeah, I think like as an individual, as a person, common sense will be like what I think everybody else should know, obviously. Kind of like as a group, we all like agree on that. But we all are individual in that group with our own perception. So I don't think there's a common definition or a real common sense that we can all agree on. But it's just like a perception as an individual. So it makes it tricky a little bit.
Yeah, I think what's come to me out of the conversation is that, yes, there's group knowledge, group wisdom, which might be cultural to a certain extent and might also be partly historical, but it's also worth recognizing that, certainly from my perspective, I don't judge someone for having a lack of common sense, because as with many things, we don't understand that person's experience or what their understanding and worldview is if we don't seek to understand it and ask them. So maybe common sense is a whole heap less common than we think it is, but everybody's working towards some example of it. Thanks, everyone.